Hello and welcome to our channel. My name is Crystal, and in this video I am canning up whole tomatoes. As always with most of our videos, I have the chapters down in the description with the timestamps, so if you're specifically looking for a certain step, no worries, the timestamp is down in the description and you can find what you're looking for and get right to that step. Now this is a simple recipe with it's kind of a tedious process, and what I mean by that is that you don't really need any ingredients for it other than your tomatoes and some lemon juice or citric acid, but the process to can them can be a little bit time consuming. When I can whole tomatoes, I like to make sure that they are fresh. While I have frozen a ton of tomatoes to make pizza sauce and tomato sauces, I like to can whole tomatoes fresh from the garden. I also like to can them in their own juice. It gives me the most similar flavor of fresh tomatoes throughout the winter. When I'm not able to grow the nice fresh tomatoes from the garden during winter time, canning them whole right from the garden, it's the one way I can get that fresh tomato flavor in whatever it is that I'm making. So the recipe I'm using is from the Ball Preserving book. It's from this book here, and it's tomatoes packed in own juice is what it says. And I do whole tomatoes. It's a very, very, very simple process. It's just a long process because you're not cooking them over the stove in any way. They're gonna be cooking inside the jar when you process them in the canner. So it takes about an hour and a half or so in the canner. My favorite way to use whole tomatoes is to strain them out and add them to pizza. When I make homemade pizzas on Fridays, I like to make myself, because nobody else likes it, a veggie pizza, and using the canned whole tomatoes or using fresh tomatoes is just, it's good stuff. Before I forget, if you could give this video a thumbs up, I would super appreciate it. Let's get started. It's pretty easy. Like I said, it's just time consuming. Okay, so we are canning up 3 different varieties of Roma tomatoes today, and the first thing we're going to do is wash them off really well, remove the stems, and inspect them for any yucky spots. Like these 3 are kind of yucky, so we will be sharing them with the chickens. So for blanching the tomatoes, we have a boiling pot of water, a large bowl of ice water, and our enormous bowl of Roma tomatoes. Our water is already boiling, so now we will place some of the tomatoes into the boiling water and let them sit in there from anywhere between 30 seconds and a couple minutes. It really depends on the size of the tomatoes and how ripe they are. I just pay attention to the skins, and once they start to either crack or get wrinkly, I know it's time to take them out of the boiling water and put them immediately into the ice water bath to stop any of the cooking process. It's a good example of what we are looking for when we're blanching tomatoes. The skins are wrinkly and will easily slip off all of the tomatoes. Now that all of the tomatoes are blanched, I will move them over to the colander in the sink. I'm going to use my strawberry huller or tomato corer today and remove the stems of the tops of all of the Roma tomatoes. Then the skins will slip right off of the tomatoes. I'm going to put the skins in a compost pile bowl, and the tomatoes will go into another clean bowl for us to can up in a little bit. I'm going to repeat this process over and over and over again until all of the tomatoes are done. Back at the stove, I've had the water bath canner over a low heat to slowly warm up the water. Preheating the water makes it go a little faster when it comes to processing the jars. It also makes it for a great place to preheat jars. So I'm going to place the jars in the rack of the water bath canner, but not lower the rack into the water, because moving the jars from the cold surface and cold contents inside the jars to an immediately boiling hot water situation could cause the jars to crack or break. So by preheating them, this helps to hopefully prevent that from happening. Now we need to add some extra acidity to the jars. We are using lemon juice, but you can also use citric acid. Usually you can find citric acid in the canning section of the store or sometimes in the baking section. We are using regular store-bought lemon juice. I'm going to be adding 1 tablespoon per pint jar. And now would also be the time that you would add salt to the jars if you are going to be adding salt. We aren't adding salt, so I'm not going to be doing that. So this is where things get really messy for me. We are going to be packing jars with tomatoes. I have 3 in here now, and this is how it looks. As I'm packing them into the jar, I am slowly pressing them down so that the juices from the tomatoes just cover each layer of tomatoes. So as you press it down, the juices will sit on top of the tomatoes just like this. I'm just going to repeat this process until I have about a 1/2 inch of headspace between the contents of the jar and the top of the jar. As I pack them in, I'm going to gently press them down and then measure for a 1/2 inch of headspace. This jar is perfect. So now I'm going to move on and do the rest of the jars. This is always such a messy procedure for me. I don't know if it's just me or anybody else experiences this, but packing the tomatoes down, I've canned many different things, and for some reason canning things like this gets so messy because I'm trying to pack as many in as I am able to and measure for the correct headspace, and in turn it creates a messy workspace. Okay, now that I've cleaned up my counter, the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to clean up the rims of the jars. There is a lot of tomato residue from pressing down on the tomatoes as I was packing them in, and if I leave them like that, the lids will not seal to the jars properly. So I'm going to go ahead and clean them off with some distilled white vinegar and t-shirt rag. I use a t-shirt rag because it doesn't really produce much lint, and that because the lint can get on the rim of the jar and that can prevent the lids from sealing. So I take the t-shirt rag and a little bit of vinegar and I wipe down each of the rims. And I'm also going to do the same thing to the whole jar because I got tomato juice everywhere. Now I'm going to add the lids. These are wide mouth lids because they are wide mouth jars. And then I will add the wide mouth bands, and we put them on finger tight. And so finger tight just means using just the tips of your fingers, and you place it onto the jars and you twist as far as you can go with just your fingers, and then you stop. And that's it. Alrighty, so now we're going to move the jars over the counter next to the water bath canner. I'm going to just put the jars into the rack of the water bath canner. You need at least an inch of water over the tops of the jars, so I like to use my bubble tool just to measure and make sure that I have at least an inch of water over the top of the jars. I'm going to go ahead and put the lid back on and wait for the water to come up to a boil. Now that the canner has reached a boil, I'm going to go ahead and turn down the burner slightly and then set the timer for 1 hour and 25 minutes. Now that the hour and 25 minutes is over, I'm going to go ahead and turn the burner off and remove the lid to the canner and make sure it's turned away from me so we don't get a steam burn to the face. I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes to allow the jars to cool off just slightly before we move them over to the countertop. Now that the 5 minutes is up, I'm going to go and raise the rack out of the water bath canner and move the jars one by one to a towel on my countertop. It's a very simple recipe. You don't get much simpler than just the tomatoes and the lemon juice. But it is a semi-tedious process and it's just time consuming. And as long as I'm able to get it done first thing in the morning, it's not a big deal. They can process on the stove while I am getting other things done around the house. As far as the whole tomatoes go, all I do is I let them sit on the counter for about a day or so. And then I write the contents of the jar on the lid, as well as the month and year that I canned it. And then I remove the band and stick them in our pantry. And that is pretty much it. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below. As always, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you so very much. I hope you found this video helpful or entertaining or both. If you did, give it a thumbs up. And we will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.